Howdy, this is I Go Travel with Don Barnett. You know, we're along the Rio Grande border here with Mexico, and you can run into trouble before you know it. I had several little skirmishes and problems with the border. Did I ever tell you about the time I got robbed along the border? I'll tell you that a little bit later in the travelogue. But I can tell you another story. There's about 15 dams on the Rio Grande River, and one day we thought we'd drive over and take a look at one of them. And we did. We pulled up to the border guard, and the American border guard told us, he said, well, listen, we've had a little bit of trouble around here the last few days with drugs and some other problems. He says, I wouldn't go over into Mexico, but you can go drive out on the floating bridge out into the middle of the lake. There's a turnaround there, a wider area, and turn around and come on back. I said, well, we're here, we may as well take a look at it. So I did that. We drove on out, I took a few pictures and came back to the border station, and the guard was there, and he waves me in. And I pulled up to the wicket going very slow, and I hear this horrible crunching, grinding, busting noise on the top of my camper. I knew right away that overhang was too low and I'd hit it. My foot was on the brake immediately, and suddenly that lone guard in that lonely place turned into about 10 or 15 guards pouring out the doors and the windows looking at my camper. I said, well, boys, I'll jump up, climb the ladder at the back and see what the damage is. And they said, no, you're not allowed out of your vehicle here. I said, well, I'll back up. So they said, okay. So I put her in reverse, and that grinding, crunching, smashing noise, I can still hear it plain as day. I backed out, and that solved the problem for the time being only. My air conditioner, like the one on top of this camper, was totally crunched. I told the border guards it was their fault because they had waved me into the overhang area. The guards told me to register my complaint by mail when I got home. I wrote several letters back to the border guard place, and I told them that they were at fault, and they said, finally, the letter came and said, look, we're not responsible for anything. It's all your responsibility when you approach the border. Case closed. That was it. Well, I was going to write to the Prime Minister, the Premier, and the President of the United States about my case. But I decided sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. And this time, I just lost. So I'll tell you another story or two along the border in this travelogue, and we'll work our way up to Big Bend National Park, and then we headed north from there up through West Texas and the Panhandle. I'll show you a few pictures there, and we were headed to home. Okay, come along. I'll tell you a few stories. As we followed the Rio Grande River upstream, the country got more mountainous as we went westward and into West Texas. It was a good two-lane highway that followed the river, but it was narrow and twisty at times. It was drier country as we gained elevation up from the Gulf Coast. It was our kind of camping, a little more remote and isolated, with no crowd or kids or dogs or somebody's radio blaring music at you that you didn't like. We were in a pretty remote spot, but we were up from the river with a very picturesque view, and the cactus in bloom, it just made it a nice place. One afternoon, we watched a couple of fancy-looking vehicles go down along the river, and people came up from the other side, and they waded across the river carrying boxes, and they handed them over to people on the American side. We thought that was interesting, but you know, thinking back at it, if those were drugs, for example, I don't know what else they would be exchanging over the river in an isolated place. But we were kind of in a dangerous situation, maybe up there in the high perch looking down at them, because they could plainly see that we were camped up there watching them. However, all is well that ends well. People have always crossed back and forth across the river ever since the old pioneer days. Here you see some Mexican guys riding their mules across. I watched a couple of guys riding their horses across the river and toward us. I didn't think much of it at the time. My wife walked back to the camper, and I stayed to take a few more photographs of the scenery. It was a very nice spring day, and I enjoyed taking the photos. I heard a noise behind me, and to my surprise, or maybe I should say to my shock, those two horse riders I had been watching were between me and my camper. They got off their horses and looked around, talking in their Spanish language, which I did not understand. Were they talking about me? I didn't know. When they mounted up again, I got braver and made some motions and hand signals, pointing to my camera and hoping they might get the idea that I'd like to take a picture or two of them. I was motioning and mumbling, el foto, la foto, senor, el photographique, and to my surprise, the one fella turns to me and he says, in perfect English, "Yeah, go ahead, we don't care. Take all the photos you want." It just goes to show you that when you get into an uncertain situation, you can get all worked up and fearful when there might not be any need to do so. These guys were gentlemen and top class in every way. I eventually walked back to the camper, and that is when I realized I had left my coffee cup on that rock back there. And it was it wasn't any old coffee cup. It was a special cup to me. It was an original Tim Hortons coffee house travel mug. I told my wife that I was going back to get my coffee mug. We had seen more riders coming up, and my wife told me that there was no way I was going back there to get any old coffee cup. Well, I firmly disagreed, but there was something in her tone of voice that told me I had better heed what she was saying. Realizing it might be a long walk back to Canada, I listened, and we headed down the road out of there. You know that coffee cup that I left in the rock down there? We got home quite a bit later, and I'm sorting through my photographs, kind of sorting them out, throwing out the ones I didn't want. And I came across a photograph, and I found my coffee cup. There is that young Mexican fella, and there is my coffee cup right in his hand. He stole it. There's the evidence. I was robbed. No doubt about it. That young Mexican fella had robbed me. Yes, sir. That was quite a surprise to me. What do you say there, Mr. Cameraman? How did he know that was my coffee cup? Well, I don't know. What do you mean he didn't steal it then? I left it. Oh, no. I found it's always easier to point your finger at the other guy. Yeah, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And no, I'm not changing. I'm too old to know better. Sometimes I wonder about that cameraman of mine. Anyway, now we are near Big Bend National Park. Across the river is the little town of Boquillas, Mexico. Since the U.S. Strengthened its border wall restrictions and built the wall in places, quite a few little Mexican communities along the border have dried up and people have moved away. However, Boquillas, which is just across the river from the national park, has remained. When we were there, this guy from Boquillas had a great voice, and his songs echoed through the canyon.
No se lo des a nadie, cielito lindo, que a mí me toca.
There were signs on the American side asking for donations for his singing. Various craft items were left behind over there for tourists to buy on a donation basis. Money was being raised to support Boquillas' school programs. They have reopened the border between Boquillas and the park. You can now get a small boat to paddle you across the river. Then you can ride a car or a horse or even a donkey a kilometer or so into Boquilla townsite itself. It is a great experience. Try to do it if you get the chance. Big Bend National Park is a popular hiking, camping, and sightseeing place. Like in all national, state, and provincial parks, the campground was clean, spacious, and reasonably priced. It was just a nice, relaxing place to stay. In some places in the park, you could see the scars of trenches dug for irrigation when the park area was private land. At home, we keep food away from the bears in places like this. But here, the concern is not bears, but it's those javelinas who come around at night to look and visit your campsite looking for food. The buildings and tourist facilities were modest but very nice. Just take a look. We were in the mountain country. We hiked on some of the trails. It was a wild and rugged place. And being so close to the Mexican border just added a sense of excitement to it all. Big Bend is a great hiking place. Trails ranged from ones like this one with steps and handrails to more primitive hiking trails in the backcountry. Some trails gave us beautiful panoramic views of the river, but you had to watch your step in some places. There were no handrails or ropes. One place down on the mudflats near the river made me a little nervous when I saw all the footprints of so many people who had passed through this area only a night or so before. After the national park, we headed straight north through the West Texas panhandle as it shows on the red line here. It's dry country that has survived and flourished because of the availability of water. Windmills and pumps draw water from the underground water of the Ogallala aquifer. This giant water source provides water to most U.S. agricultural production and to millions of people. The Ogallala water aquifer is one of the largest in the world, and it runs from Texas right on up north into the state of Nebraska. Fears of an oil spill halted the Keystone XL pipeline from Canada, and crop irrigation continues to deplete the water reservoir, and more efficient agricultural and urban water use is now being advocated. West Texas has been an oil source, but older machinery left unused on the land gave me the impression that the oil boom was a thing of the past. There was a lot of old rusty machinery and abandoned buildings lying around. We did see some evidence of new technologies starting to develop. Here are a few more pictures of the West Texas country. Mesquite trees survive in the dry country, and they've been used for wood burning and furniture making for a lot of years. Early indigenous people found the sap from this tree as a source of medicine. Its leaves and bark were boiled for food, and its beans were ground into a gluten-free meal and flour for flatbread. Texas is a big place, and isolated private ranches have expanded from cattle raising to a tourist hunting business. Wealthy clients are flown in by aircraft to participate in various hunting pursuits. These ranches are big, private, and isolated. Found in the middle of the Panhandle, the Palo Duro is referred to as the Grand Canyon of Texas. It is the location of the last stand of the Comanches and the Kiowa people. After the U.S. military slaughtered over 1,200 of their horses, these indigenous people were forced out of the area. We hiked around this area for several days. We also biked an abandoned railway bed. On one ride, we came by some prisoners out on a workday. There was only one guard for a dozen or so prisoners. The yellow arrow on the right points to the lone guard, and you can see some of the prisoners in white cutting grass on the steep slope below the bridge. We were a little nervous biking by them, but everything worked out fine. Several more days of camping, and we were close to home sweet home. Well, sir, neighbor, as I said before, that's all she wrote. We've had a good time in this travelogue. If you haven't seen some of the others up here in the Texas country, by all means, take a look. All right, see y'all. Adios for now, amigos.